Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Hopefully we have a few more people show up. I don't see very many board members there. I see Sandy. I know Tammy's there. Chris Fuller, Rick Eccles. I see Paul Bigford. Has Rick Yorman, Errol, Ross, any of you guys shown up?
Rick Yorman's here.
Okay, great.
Ross is here.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so we can call the meeting to order. It's 2 o'clock. Thanks everyone for being here. Some of you are Zooming, some of us are in person, so we'll do the best we can to navigate through the situation. Any additions to the agenda in front of you? I've added one thing that you may or may not have gotten. Chris Fuller wants to do a little bit of a water quality presentation, and so that's on the agenda, and I think I sent that out, but that's the only thing I have to add. Anybody else have to add anything? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Approval of the previous month's minutes. Can we get an approval of the minutes? Grace has given me a first. Anybody want a second?
Second.
Okay, we got a second from Carol. So the minutes from last month's meeting have been approved. Thank you very much.
I'm on a meeting.
We'll go now to Tom and let him give us his comments, management comments.
At last month's board meeting, the 2021 budget was approved. So we're moving forward. Rick and John are moving forward, and we feel confident that we had a budget of sufficient size to make sure that our lakes will remain a quality amenity as they have been, and they will continue to do so going forward. That's really the extent of my report.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to any other board member comments. Sandy? Anybody else? Nobody? Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Rick. Go ahead.
I have a real quick question.
Uh-huh.
Does that mean that some of our nice-to-have suggestions might be accomplished? I know
Remind me what
I don't remember off the top of my head, but Matt probably has it right in front of him somewhere.
It's in here somewhere. I don't remember some of the things we asked for.
Yeah.
Just additional amenities, putting blacktop on the tops of the dams in a lot of cases.
Right. So we did have to scale back some of that. Rick, what was the one that we were able to get approved?
The one that we're doing is Brittany,
Brittany.
which has been on everyone's list for 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the other two dams, which ones were those, Rick?
Windsor and Rayburn.
Unfortunately, we could not fit those two into the budget. But the amount of fish stocking and Rick, maybe you can comment the amount of fish stocking and fertilizer and so forth.
In fact, I've got those numbers here. We had been, I won't say negligent, but we have reduced our stocking quite a bit for catfish over the last few years because of budgetary concerns, but we were able to make that up and then some this year. I'll just go through the list. Lake Anne received a little over 2,600 channel catfish, Avalon 1,500, Brittany around 1,000, Lomond over 11,000, Norwood 1,000, Rayburn 1,000, and Windsor just a little over 5,000. So we got a really good price from our producer this year, and we were able to make up for lost ground there. For grass carp, again, we usually get those in the spring, but we anticipate a really big price increase this year. So we purchased those this fall. Lomond got 2,000. Of course, that's the lake with all the weed problems. And then the others received just sort of a supplemental stocking just to maintain status quo. and to account for those that have died over the last few years.
So to
And I
give-
can go into my other items in my report, or if there's something else you wanted to do first.
Well, let me just jump in. So the good, so I'm going to kind of give you a good news and bad news. An industry standard or a best practice is to spend a depreciation in capital projects. For us, our annual depreciation is $1.8 million. In 2020 and 19, if you look at those two, we spend an average of only 25% because we had the fire, and then we had to cut back because of the budget for 2020. For 2021, we're going to be at 50%. So the good news is we're definitely going to be spending more than what we have done over the last 2 years. That's the good news. The bad news is we didn't spend 100% like we would want to. So, Rick referenced that we're going to do 1 out of the 3 of the dam paving projects that we wanted to do. We're going to do the one that's in the worst shape, and that's good. The bad news is we weren't able to do the 3 that we wanted to do. So, did that answer your question?
Yep, I just wish I had my notes with me.
Well, feel free to send me an email with your questions, or you can.
Always has a list of, would be nice to have, and I was just.
Yeah, and I'd have to go, I've got it, it's in here, I guarantee you, I don't have it handy, and it may take me 30 minutes to find it, so. But,
That's great, thank you.
so Rick, if you want to go into your report now, that'll be fine.
Yeah, so I touched on the fish stocking. We also we made our November stocking of trout at Lake Brittany, and we're going to get our second stocking in the very near future. Hint, hint, hint. Dam inspections are underway. Chris Fuller is doing that for us. We also contracted with an outside third party to do inspections on our 2 high hazard dams, and they've promised that they would be completed by the end of the year. So that's to
Rick,
satisfy some insurance. I'm sorry?
when you say high hazard, which are they?
So those are Lake Ann and Loch Lomond, and it has to do with the number with the development that's downstream should there be a failure. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're in imminent danger of failure. It just means that it would be an issue if they did fail.
Gotcha, thank
So
you.
our insurance carrier wanted us to get an outside party to inspect those this year, and so that's in process. Let's see here. Late this morning, we had another inquiry about jug and limb-line fishing. I think that's come before the committee in the past. I suggested this person suggested that we have an open forum in January for the issue. I suggested that we might wait till February so we can get word out. The whole process of eliminating limb lines and jugs is kind of a complicated issue, and it would take the city to buy in, and then we would petition the Arkansas Game and Fish to make that a rule for Bella Vista. But that would allow that process to get started if that's the way we want to go. The drawdown on Lake Rayburn has hit, as I think we all know, has hit a stumbling block. The valve that we wanted to use is covered over with about 10 feet of debris in the lake, so we're afraid that if we open it, we won't get it closed. We do have a contingency plan, and we are putting in a siphon system, the same one that we used on Lake Avalon a couple years ago. We have a couple more back-ordered parts to be able to get that going, but it should be started midweek next week. And whatever time we've lost on this front end, we can make up on the back end up to about April 1st. So the intention was to have it come back up in March, early March, but if need be, we can leave it down to April 1st. I don't want to go past that though. Let's see. The Lake Ann sinkhole, which I believe we were talking about earlier, the bike trail kind of goes in that area, and I guess it was discovered by some trail users. It's an area that opened up. It might be 8 or 10 feet down to the bottom of it. And when it was discovered, it had water flowing through it. And so the first thing we did was start the siphon on Lake Ann to bring the lake level down so that we could determine whether all the water that was feeding through that area was coming from the overflow at the spillway. The good news is that that's indeed what was going on. We're going to keep it down for the time being, but it's roughly a foot down until we get some feedback from a engineering firm that we consulted with. Mike Taggart and I were out on Monday and spoke with Michael Homan with Terracon Engineering, and we're going to take into consideration their long-term recommendations for a fix. It had previously been an issue 15 years ago that was corrected, and we got 15 years of life out of it. But basically, it's going to come down to filling a void that caused that sinkhole. The bedrock in that area is very porous. So as we discover cavities, they need to be filled. And so that's what that's looking like.
Rick.
Yes?
Rick Yorman here. So is it draining the lake, or is it just showing up and there's a flow? How is it being fed? Is it underground, or is it actually draining the lake?
So it's being fed from the overflow, and by siphoning it down a foot, we have that overflow below level. So when we did that, we effectively stopped the flow through the sinkhole. So it is coming from the overflow. It's not coming through the dam itself, which is the good news, if there is any to report about that.
Rick, I have a map up, and people viewing from home can see that map. And you can see I have the cursor located right here, where the approximate location of where the sinkhole is, and then this is the spillway that Rick was talking about. And then over here, it's harder to see in this picture, is the where the siphon tube is located. We encourage everybody to stay away from the hole. It's been marked off, but we don't want to see anybody going under the caution tape and potentially getting injured. Any other comments on this, Rick?
No, I believe that does it. We're just waiting to hear back from the engineer, which he was going to consult with a couple experts in his firm and get back to us later this week or early next week, so we can develop a plan and get something done pretty quickly.
Yeah, I live on Lake Ann, and the neighborhood has a million questions about the status of that hole. And I don't know if you have plans to put anything in the paper.
Well, we put out a notice on our Facebook page.
Yep.
And so, right now we don't have any additional information because we're waiting.
Beyond the Facebook page.
But once we get additional information from the engineer, we'll put it out. We just don't have anything more.
Right.
The good news is, and Rick referenced this earlier, the good news is when we lowered the lake and the water stopped going over the spillway, the water stopped going through the sinkhole. Needless to say, that was a very relieving point for me personally, because I was concerned that potentially the water was coming from the dam as opposed to the sinkhole. So Mike was a little calmer because Mike was here 15 years ago when they had to do a similar fix. But I was a little bit keyed up until we found out for sure that it was coming from the spillway. So we'll continue to keep the community informed of what's going on, but we don't have any additional information at this time.
Okay, just a couple more items. The Lake Ranger contacts for October and November. In October, 1,656 contacts, 123 people removed who were not members, 135 contacts by boat, and 37 hours on the water. In November, 1,708 contacts, actually up a little bit. We had some great weather. 77 people removed, 130 contacts by boat, and 61 hours on the water. Year to date, from all of 2019, there were 1,535 people removed from Bella Vista property who were not members, who shouldn't have been here. And so far this year, we're at 4,130 through the end of, actually that's through the end of November. So no December numbers in that at all. It shows that we're holding up our end of the bargain on the 2020 plan. John added some narration comments to the 2020 wake boat study, and which is available for viewing. I believe is that online, or is that through Facebook, or
It's on our webpage.
Well, on our webpage? Okay.
And we plan to leave it there for the committee. The Lakes Committee has asked us to leave it up there for several years. It's a link, so it's not like it takes up space.
Okay.
So we can leave it up there for a really long time, but we received the request to leave it up there in case anybody had to reference it down, a year from now.
Okay. And I don't know if John has any comments, but if not, Chris is prepared to do his water quality data report for 2020. I think I heard a question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you a question on the people removed and contacted with. Just out of curiosity, we've got a great new app out there for Bella Vista, and it may be a little bit premature, but I wonder, is there a way that we could offer people, instead of being removed, the opportunity to sign up and get approved right then and there, so we can convert revenue, but also take the friction out and make a better experience for everybody?
I'll jump in. So Ross, part of the commitment that the board made regarding the 2020 plan was that certain amenities such as the lakes would be reserved for the membership and for guests, and that the POA would not be able to issue guest passes with the POA being the sponsor, other than the ambassador program, which is a whole nother thing. And that's small scale. It's only about 24 a year. We recognize that removing people from the property, it may rub some people the wrong way, but I think what's important is that we are fulfilling the 2020 plan commitment. The board and the membership, I think they were aware that we were previously collecting funds from people to issue them guest passes on the spot. So the board was fully aware of that, but still said, no, it's a commitment to our membership that we remove those people, and that's what we're doing. The financial impact is a little, it's not horrible. We just need to I think what's most important is that we're fulfilling the obligation. Did that answer your question, Ross?
Yeah, absolutely. I get the backdrop. I didn't understand it prior, so I don't necessarily agree with the point of view, but it is the point of view. So within this parameters, I agree. So thank you.
If I may, I believe many of the membership who supported the 2020 plan felt that the increased revenue of POA assessments would cover any loss of guest passes or things like that. So I think that point's rather moot of getting revenue from guests.
Yeah, to me, it's not really all about the revenue. I'll take it in, but you have a sanctuary up here in Bella Vista that's very rare when you look across the U.S. And to me, to be able to pull an upscale Bella Vista and continue on that path, you want to bring people in and make it a point of destination. And we've got some fantastic houses up here. We've got some housing that's more of a cottage impression. So how do you bring the demographic scale up? To me, this would be an avenue to go after that, but not for this meeting probably.
Well, I believe the demographics in Bella Vista continues to grow and grow. There's not a problem with that at all. The problem can be overcrowding of lakes. And if you live on a lake, you understand it can be overcrowded. And private, for POA members only, is what we hold true and hold everyone to be accountable for.
I'd like
If
to
it's
make
going to be a
comment.
sanctuary, it needs to be a sanctuary for POA members.
If I could, this is Rick Yorman. Let's go back when we looked at the study of impact of large boats and wake boats on the lake. If you'll recall, Errol came across a study that talked about in length about the carrying capacity of Beaver Lake that the Corps of Engineers initiated. In that process, it made us consider, we did consider, or shall I say, it introduced the issue of carrying capacity of our lakes. And on a busy weekend in the summertime, the boats, there can be a lot of traffic using the lakes. And we know that our boat permitting, whether it be kayaks, stand-up paddle boards, power boats, and so on, does continue to grow. So, it raises it. I guess it complements or exposes that issue of are the lakes for the Bella Vista property owners or is it for the public? And I think our commitment for the 2020 plan and our recognition that there is a lot of growth reinforces the fact that we want to be careful about how much capacity we have as it pertains to the lakes, whether it be by boat usage or for fishing and so on. So my conclusion is that we're probably right to ask them to leave, and their option would be to buy property and join the group.
Okay, moving on, if nobody else has any other comments or questions, we'll do Chris Fuller's water presentation. Assuming that has to be turned on. Oh no, he's gonna do it on here, okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm gonna link my stuff here and we'll get it started. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our nutrient management for our lakes here. And to start off with, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of background information pertaining to nutrients in the environment and highlight why it's important that we do have a solid monitoring program. So I think most everybody should be aware that nutrients and energy go from organism to organism, particularly in things eating each other. It can be a simple food chain, like this grass eating, or this cow eating some grass and then a person eating that cow. Or it can be more complex. We have some vegetation here, which is consumed by other mammals, other animals, which are then consumed by some top predators. Now, in an aquatic system, things are a little bit different. So there's two major pathways from which nutrients and energy can move through the aquatic system. The first is the detrital pathway, where we have stuff like leaf litter and dead animals, which are processed by macroinvertebrates, bugs. And that material is then reprocessed by another level of bugs. And then these are all then consumed by fish, like bluegill, which are then consumed by bigger predator fish like largemouth bass. Now, we really can't control how much leaf litter falls into our lakes, but we can control the next pathway a little bit. And the next pathway is particularly important. It's the Planktonic Pathway. So we have two kinds of algae that concern us with this. We have filamentous algae, which we really don't like because nothing can really eat it. And then the next kind of algae that we have is planktonic algae, or what we call phytoplankton. So the phytoplankton is consumed by tiny microscopic animals called zooplankton. And then those go to feed our very tiny baby fish. So those macroinvertebrates in the previous slide are just too big to feed these juvenile fish. So we really need a solid food source for the growing fish. Now, being a plant, algae needs sunlight to grow, bringing in solar energy and converting it to chemical energy in the form of glucose, but it also needs other nutrients, inorganic nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, which we can supply in the form of fertilizer. But we need to be careful not to overdo this and add too much fertilizer, because nitrogen and phosphorus have proven to be toxic in aquatic environments. And to reiterate this, the EPA ranks nutrient pollution in the top 3 impairments for both lakes and streams consistently from their yearly reports. And so what we don't want to have happen is that we negatively affect our own biological populations, and then we certainly don't want to affect any populations downstream from us. So I hope you can understand that it's pretty important for us to monitor the nutrients in our lakes and decide exactly when and how much we can fertilize. So we have a volunteer program set up that takes secchi depth for us. Secchi depth is measured with a special disc. It's about football's diameter in size, and you can see a picture of the disc on the screen. It's black and white in 4 quadrants, and the disc is lowered into the water until it can't be seen anymore, raised up a little bit till it can be seen, and that's your secchi depth. So this is an indication of water quality, because the farther down that you can see, the clearer the water. Now, for us, our lakes don't really have high sediment loads in the water, so it's for our use, it's really an estimation of that plankton productivity. So the tiny plants, the algae, and the tiny animals, the zooplankton. And we know that that's important, again, because it's the base of that juvenile fish feeding cycle. So when the secchi depth is too deep, the water is too clear, and it's basically a desert. It's not biologically favorable. There's not enough food to feed the fish. And Mostly that comes about because there's not enough nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, to feed the algae. If the Secchi is too shallow, that means we have the potential for those negative impacts, but the water is also very murky at that point, and it becomes unaesthetic, and a lot of our lake residents don't like that. So once the volunteers record their Secchi depth, they return that information to us, and we can place it in a specialized calculator. The calculator takes the month of the year, the current Secchi depth, and our target Secchi depth of 2 meters, which is about 6 feet, and it returns to us how many bags of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer we need to put into a lake to bring that Secchi depth to the 2 meter mark. And I've got a graph here to help kind of illustrate this all a little better. You can think of this graph as a cross section of the lake. So at the very top of the graph, you have 0 meters, which is the surface of the water. And then down the graph, the number ends at 6. That's 6 meters deep in the lake. And of course, on the bottom, we have dates or time. And so the data, the Secchi data is represented by the markers on the chart. In the blue-green color, we have weekly data. That's the actual data that's returned to us. And then in black, we have the monthly averages for that, just to make overall trends a little bit easier to see. Reiterating the too much, too little point, I have marked the graph in 2 red zones. The very top one, that's where the water is too murky and it becomes unaesthetic, and we have the potential for negative nutrient impacts. And in the bottom half of the graph, that's where it's too clear and it's a desert, basically. And in the magenta line in the center, we have the 2 meter mark highlighted, and around it, there's a nice green target zone for us. The vertical blue lines, if present on a graph, represent fertilization events. And hopefully with a fertilization event, we increase plankton productivity, thereby decreasing clarity and Secchi depth towards the 2 meter mark. Now, just want to point out that obviously if the Secchi depth is too shallow, if it's on the top side of the graph, we really can't do anything about that. There's no way for us to like push the number down other than just hoping that the nutrients settle in the water and settle out of the bottom of the lake or float out through rain events. So here's our first graph here of Lake Anne. You can see that it kind of started off strong and then decreased a little bit. So we fertilized, it was still a little low. We fertilized again, and then it maintained itself for the rest of the year.
Well, Chris, where can you tell when you fertilized?
You should be able to see 2 vertical blue lines right there, one between May and June.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I see it. I see it. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll move on to the next lake, Avalon. Avalon started off extremely clearly, 4 meters down, which is 12 to 15 feet deep, very, very clear. So we fertilized once to help bring that back up, and it dropped again, and we had to spend a lot of the growing season to fertilize to maintain that. And this actually caused us a lot of problems at the beach area because the visibility was so high. It allowed water to penetrate deep into the water and allowed that filamentous algae that we don't like to grow and clump up and float off, and a lot of it settled at the beach. So that was a big issue for us. So that's another benefit of having the Secchi depth at 2 meters, is it helps reduce the amount of filamentous algae that's present. For Lake Brittany, you'll see that there is no fertilization events. In general, this lake started off apparently strong and decreased through the mid of the growing season and then increased again. We don't fertilize Brittany because we stock it with trout, and trout don't particularly do well in those murkier waters. And it's also, you know, and we want the trout population for an alternative fishing experience, but they also go to stimulate the bass population themselves. And with the two upturns on the ends of the graphs, that could be a little misleading because Brittany is well known to have more blue-green algae blooms than some of the other lakes. So just because the Secchi depth is shallower doesn't necessarily mean it's the good kind of algae that we want. They're not harmful algal blooms like a lot of blue-green algae, but it's stuff that the juvenile fish don't particularly like to eat. And it's stuff that the zooplankton find hard to eat as well.
Well, Brittany is a much colder lake than the other lakes. Is that right?
It is, because it's spring fed, and the lack of plankton especially helps that in the winter, because usually if you have higher plankton, a lot of the solar energy gets trapped in the upper surface of the water, and it makes temperatures warmer on the surface. With Loch Lomond, we try to very strategically do our fertilization events, because being so much bigger than any of the other lakes, it takes a lot of volume of fertilizer to affect any change on it. So you can see that it started off kind of strong, dipped a little bit, recovered. We then fertilized it a couple of times to help it maintain itself through the end of the growing season. And that's particularly important for us because on all of the lakes, in fact, because if we have a strong finish to the growing season, that means that fish will go into winter healthier, and that means they'll come out of winter healthier and be stronger for the spawning season in the next spring.
It's the most heavily fished lake.
It is too. Norwood, you'll see, has received a couple of fertilizations itself, and Norwood has historically been a lake that we have not fertilized because of the solar bees. So if you've been out to Norwood, you'll notice these floating contraptions in the water with solar panels, and they cycle water up from the bottom of the lake, which all the nutrients tend to settle down into the water and rest on the bottom of the lake. So theoretically, that water is a little more nutrient dense than the surface water. So it brings that water up to the surface and cycles it across the top, thereby kind of naturally fertilizing the lake with itself. But we've noticed that the fish populations have been doing better the last few years. So we wanted to see if we could give them a boost anyway. And so we went ahead and fertilized Norwood a couple of times this past year. And you can see that it stayed close to that target mark all year itself.
Well, now, how long have you had the solar bees in Norwood?
John could probably tell you for sure. So we've had a couple of solar bees on Norwood since we've had solar bees, and then a couple were on Windsor. And when we purchased the solar bees, we decided to move all of them over to Norwood. They've all been on Norwood for about 5 years, but I don't know the exact date when they were first introduced. John, like I said, would probably know off the top of his head.
Your 5-year mark is, I believe, absolutely correct. Originally, we got them on Windsor, and I think it was around 2010. We had two of the bigger.
That's what I thought. Yeah. They've been there. Some of them have been there for 10 years. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
The next lake we have is Rayburn. Started off pretty well. We only had to fertilize it a couple of times just to bring it a little closer to that 2-meter mark. and it maintained itself again through the end of the year. And finally, we have Lake Windsor, which we, again, never really fertilize because it self-regulates. You can see the consistency at which the lake stays. I mean, it pretty much does this all year. Even in the winter, it's very consistent, stays very close to the 2-meter mark. And with that, I don't have any more SECI data. That's all the lakes. So if we have questions, or I have other water quality data that if you would like to see, I'll show it to you. If not, that's all right too.
Well, the question I have is that there's quite a bit of variation there between all the lakes, and yet the lakes are pretty much in the same geographical area. Is it just because of depth, or is it size of the lake? Is there any particular reason that there's, quite a bit of variation there between the ones that don't need fertilization and the ones that do?
It's all of those reasons. So even as they are in basically the same geographic region, their watersheds are very different. I mean, Lake Brittany itself is spring-fed heavily. It really doesn't get a whole lot of rainwater by itself. And then Lake Brittany then feeds, well, if it ever got full enough to feed out, it would feed into Lake Anne's watershed. We know that Windsor has the highest landscape to water acre ratio. So that's why it probably can keep itself up, is because in comparison to the amount of water that it has so much runoff, taking nutrients from the landscape and putting it into the lake that we don't really need to do anything. Yeah, I mean, the depth and the individual topography of the lakes makes a difference with water motion and the ability for algae to establish. And then, of course, the individual watersheds for each lake have different nutrient contents. I mean, some lakes have flatter land, some have more mountainous regions, which tend to be nutrient poor. So there's not really any one factor that drives the particular stability of any lake.
Hey, Chris, one more question. How do aquatic vegetation like leaves affect the food chain? And I know we encourage residents not to put leaves in the lake, but we do get an awful lot of leaves in the lake just naturally. And besides being an aggravation to fishermen, how does that work?
I mean, so the process of a leaf falling from a tree is called senescence. And it's actually a pretty conservative process. The tree, there's a lot of resources that go into making a leaf. So the tree wants to sequester as much of those nutrients as possible from the leaf before it drops. So the nutrient content of a green leaf versus one that is naturally senesced off of a tree are very different. A naturally fallen leaf is almost entirely made out of carbon. And it has a relatively low nitrogen and phosphorus content. So the leaf itself is not really that much in the way of fertilization. Of course, when you get an infinite amount of something, then you have an infinite amount of its constituents, right? So of course, the more leaves that go into the lake, the more potential there is to bring in nutrients. But in general, it really, our lakes are big enough and we get few enough leaves in the lake compared to their size that it probably doesn't make a huge amount of difference. This kind of thing was part of my master's degree work, and if you take a leaf from the lake and you analyze its nutrient content, the bulk of those nutrients come from the microbial film or the bacterial goo, if you will, that forms on the leaf itself while it's in the lake. And most of those nutrients, again, come from the water column itself. So it's definitely outside nutrients that are the main factor for determining the total nutrients in the lake. Stuff like the weathering of rocks, if there's any nitrogen fixing bacteria in the lake, like blue-green algae, they will pull nitrogen into the water as well. But anthropogenic human fertilizer is another big one. Any wastewater is another big source. But no, the leaves themselves don't really contribute too much to that.
Chris, when you mention putting in nutrients, putting in the fertilizer, that it could be a large amount, what do you, how much is that? Like when you fertilize Lomond, is it 500 pounds of fertilizer? Is it 5,000 pounds?
Yeah, let me get that information for you. I should have it up here. We do keep those records.
Because I know you handle that by hand for the most part, don't you?
That's correct. So if we switch over here, I believe this one. You should hopefully be seeing a spreadsheet right now.
Yes.
There we go. I don't know if my computer is going to allow me to zoom here, but
those 50 pound bags.
Yeah, yes. So the bags of phosphorus P are 25-pound bags, and the bags of N are 50-pound bags. So, for example, in 2019, in August, we put 44 bags of P and 105 bags of nitrogen. So times 50 pounds and times 25 pounds, it's quite a lot, not to mention the, just the sheer volume of the bags themselves. It's quite large. Just in this year, both of those fertilization events that we had, it looks like we put in a total of about 42 or so bags of phosphorus and about 105 bags of nitrogen. So it's still quite a lot.
Yeah, so that's 5,250 pounds for Lomond. That's a lot. Yeah, a lot to handle. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Chris, one more question. Going back to leaves. So what is when leaves fall into the lake, does that affect the acidity of the water? Do leaves have a lot of acid? And the second part of that question would be, in layman's terms, we want to encourage residents not to put their leaves in the lake. What is the best explanation for not doing so in layman's terms?
So to answer your first question, leaves do have a lot of tannic acid, which is kind of what gives leaves the woody feel. Wood itself has a lot of tannic acid. So in places where leaves can't be processed well, like in a stagnant wetland, you'll notice that the water there is very black or dark brown, and that's because of the tannic acid. And it's a very hostile place for organisms to live. If there was any water flow at all or any good source of oxygen, then that probably wouldn't be the case, because the tannic acid would be broken down organically to compensate for that. So, our lakes have, again, such a, comparatively large volume, and we have well enough water flow that tannic acid would never really do anything to our lakes. And I've got the data again here, some of this alternative data that if you wanted to look at it, but you can see the pH of our lakes is still fairly basic. We have all of our lakes kind of hover between 8 and 9 pH, and so a pH of 7 is perfectly neutral. It's the pH of pure water, and say like I believe lemon juice has a pH of like 1. So you can see that we're, even if there was a large input from tannic acid, it's doing basically nothing to counteract the weathering from our natural rocks here, which our rocks tend to be very basic. So our lakes tend to be on the basic side. As far as your second question, encouraging people not to put leaves in the lake. Honestly, I'm not sure that I can think of a good biological reason not to just let them do it. But from a management position, you know, like we've learned on Rayburn, especially here in the last couple of weeks, the leaves tend to make big leaf mats and they settle in places that is very inconvenient for us. Like we're fairly confident that accumulated leaf matter is all the sediment that is covering the Rayburn outlet in the lake, and just the big leaf rafts. But again, I can't think of any biological reason why we would discourage people from putting their leaves in the lake.
So to restate in a management, for the management's position and that of the Lakes Committee is we are not encouraging people to blow their leaves into the lake. That is not allowed. We don't want them to do that. Just want to make sure we're clear on that it's not allowed.
It's not allowed.
But
we need to. There's no biological reason for it. It's purely aesthetic.
But we need to provide a reason to people, otherwise they won't do it.
That was the purpose of my question, is there an overwhelming reason, like, hey, you're really damaging the quality of the lake by doing so? You could say no, but at the same time, if you're causing these big leaf mats and other issues in the lakes, it is kind of a big deal. And as a fisherman, it's just very aggravating when you're trying to fish an area and there's nothing but leaves. I mean, it just gets very aggravating. So anyway.
Yeah, like a leaf mass plus problems with plugging up filters, and I guess those would be two good reasons.
Right.
That people would be willing to accept.
Very impressive presentation, Chris. Thank you. It's amazing how you guys regulate, and when you guys do fertilize with disparity of the amount of fertilization, how you guys are able to control that variance and the impact. It's pretty impressive. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question or a comment. When you were showing the data for Windsor, and you were saying it has a great land mass to pull from, I've always had this notion that people fertilizing their lawns and doing all that sort of thing is not a good thing for the lake. Do you have any comment about that? And is there any value in asking people not to fertilize their lawns, et cetera?
Yeah, so landscape fertilization really plays into that problem. If we go back a couple of slides here to this point here where nutrients causing toxicity and the EPA ranking it so high. And most of those things come from wastewater effluent and landscape fertilization, both personal lawns and farms. So that is a valid concern. And that process is called eutrophication, the dumping of large quantities of nutrients into a waterway. However, we are not in an area that is ever really going to be a problem. Because we live in such a mountainous and karst region, the water flows through our rocks very easily and the soil is very thin. Not a lot of nutrients hang around here to begin with. So our lakes are very nutrient poor without any influence. I mean, Windsor's kind of the exception. You know, I think if we, you'll notice the reason that we have to fertilize is because there isn't that much nutrients in our watersheds being put into the lakes. You know, if we were just to leave everything alone, a lot of the lakes would just go completely clear during the summer. So it's, again, not something that we really have to be concerned with. And the fact that we take extra measures to not put any more in than we have to really decreases the stress that we put on the systems with the nutrient load. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, that makes a lot of sense when you talk about the rock and so on. Yeah.
So Chris, are there some more slides you want to show us, or?
I mean, the only if you really wanted to see them, or if you had questions about any of the other data. It's just kind of accessory data, and all of this data is available to everyone. If you just go to the website, I have the slide up that shows you where to go to get to the rest of this data, like the pH data that I showed you.
Okay.
Go to our website, the Things to Do tab. There's a lakes column with the water quality at the bottom of it. You know, this data is just kind of illustrating the other parameters that we take in the lake. Again, they're just kind of accessory data to show a point. Like the pH was useful when that question was asked to
Yeah.
see, but I mean, there's no real points to be made with it. So.
Okay. Hey, we appreciate you doing this. I think it's very informative that we do this, and I for one enjoy seeing the graphs of all the lakes and see what the depths, with the Secchi depths, how it varies from time to time and season to season, month to month. So, do appreciate all the effort put forth on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Chris, Rick Norman, can you send me that? Would you mind emailing that presentation so I can send it to the Secchi Disc volunteers?
Yes, and Rick, I also have a packet just for them, so I'll get
great. Great, and if you would like to send it out, that's fine also. I just want to make sure they recognize their work does have an impact.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say, kind of before we got off the subject, because I'm not sure if Chris mentioned it or not, but you know, he talked about our fertilizer calculator being pretty specialized. So that's not an off-the-shelf calculator, and it's not something that we just came up with on the fly. Those models were built through about 3 years worth of really detailed chemistry work with the lakes, with a geochemistry lab at the University of Arkansas. So we did a lot of work to come up with those models, so that they're not just kind of thrown together. I just wanted to make that perfectly clear. And you know, each one of them is kind of tailor-made to its own lake. So it's not, you know, Chris was talking about how a watershed is different, and so goes the model that kind of feeds how much fertilizer you can put in there.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've covered everything on the agenda with the exception of the summary document. And I think, Rick, you were going to cover that?
Yes, you talking about the summary of results in the studies?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go ahead and it has been distributed to the Lakes JEC and everybody on here. So it is I'll call it a compilation of the work that we have done over the past several years. Errol Wasson and Paul Bickford and I kind of sat down and tried to capture that. We wanted to offer it as a summary so that, and in recognition of the work that has been done, and to make sure it transcends or stays with the Lakes JAC regardless of who's on the committee. So we didn't want it to be lost over time. So because there has been a lot of work done, whether it's volunteers doing some studies or the management team doing the 2 events at the lake with filming wake boats and other boats and so on. So I offer it to the Joint Advisory Committee as a summary and something that can be kept over time. Tom mentioned it earlier about the study that John is narrated and added to the website. We'd like to add this as well. So I'll solicit comments or inputs, and I'd ask that Matt, that we be able to record it and keep it for history.
I just wanted to make a comment that we're keeping the minutes and information like this. We have information that goes back 10 to 15 years. We plan on continuing to add information to our website. So the minutes, I think the minutes for the Lakes Committee go all the way back to 2016. We plan on not removing that information. You know, you get into 21, you add 21, you remove. We plan on leaving that information on there, and we'll leave the video on there and so forth, because this is valuable information that could help a future Lakes Committee down the road.
Yeah, I think it also gives us something to refer to as we get questions into the future, which we'll inevitably get. I think it's a good document to have handy as we get new residents that move into the area, and questions, and some of those are going to have questions about wake boats and about different things. I think it's just a good document to refer to. It's a quick reference. I'm going to put it in the front of my folder so it can easily be found in the future. But yeah, thanks for putting that together.
Yeah, and the most important part is the conclusions and summary at the end of it, because it recognizes that we felt that actions should be taken. We took those actions, but at this point we recognize a variety of interests, and we wanted to recognize those different interests, and the fact that we really come to a conclusion that we've done a lot of work, and we want to leave it at that.
Did you want to take a vote of the committee to adopt this?
I mean, it's a summary of what we've kind of done, and it's kind of a summary recommendation. Yeah, if that's what we need to do to, it wouldn't hurt.
It's not a requirement, but I think it does a very good job of encapsulating all of the activities over the last couple of years. I think it would make sense.
Okay. So Tom has given us a good suggestion to adopt this document as an official document, and so if somebody wants to make a motion and second it, and then we can vote on putting this in the archives and using it as an official document moving forward.
I'll make that motion that we accept the document and make it official, and looking for a second.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, Paul, you second?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll second
all in favor? Say aye.
it. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thanks for the work you guys did on that. I appreciate it very much.
You know, Rick Yorman, you said, well, it'll go into the archives. Well, how can we use this to help our boaters, to make it really visible to them? Because as I read through this document, if I was a boater, it really gave me a perspective on why these requirements are laid out. And it helped me as a boater understand reasons why, and exactly how we responsibly went about coming to these conclusions. You know, I don't know how the group feels about making it more visible to people who register their powerboats or not. Does anybody have any opinion on that?
I think we struggle to communicate, you know, the annual registration process when you go to the POA office, or I guess now you're doing it by mail, or yeah, I guess you're doing it by mail. Every year it's been a challenge, at least since I've been on the Lakes Committees. How do you communicate the new rules and regulations to the owners?
Right.
And I guess every year we try to do a really good job of that. And Tom, I don't know if you have any other suggestions. I don't know if this document would be too big to put in a packet, but.
Well, you know, I understand where you're coming from. You're trying to provide the why behind what the policies are. I think it becomes too much information, and when you get too much information, people tend to not read anything at all. The boating regulations, we update those every year, and so when we start registering boats for the 21 season, or the year, they'll receive an updated new copy of the boating regulations, which will incorporate a lot of these changes that were made by the committee. If someone has any interest and approaches us about, well, how did you come up with this? What was the logic behind it? I think at that time we can refer them. But unfortunately, I think too much information ends up leading to not enough, people digesting it at all. I think I've said this before. The good news is on our e-blasts that we send out, the good news is that 40% of the messages are read. That is well above industry standard. That's the good news. The bad news is 60% are not read at all. And so I think that we have to be very careful to give the community just enough information so that they can, if we can get the community, the boaters, to read and understand the boating regulations, that would be an amazing accomplishment. To get them to read anything additional, I think, is going to be a challenge. But if anybody approaches any committee member or any member of management and asking about the logic behind it, that's part of the reason why we have this information on our website.
Always a challenge.
Always a challenge.
Because you're right, I've gotten into situations myself. If there's too much information, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. If you get too much to read, nobody reads it. It's just, yeah.
It kind of is along the same lines as when we have a board meeting. We have a community of 32,000 people, and we'll have a board meeting with 10 people in attendance. That's not good. Now, with the onset of COVID and how we broadcast it, we've upped those numbers to 300 and 400, which is great improvement over 10. But still, at 32,000 people, only 300 or 400 people viewing it. That's still pretty low. You can't force people to watch it.
Correct. Okay, I'm looking at the agenda. I don't have anything else on here. Does anybody else have anything else to discuss, or questions or concerns or anything? Okay, Kelly, you there? When's our next meeting? January, second Wednesday in January. I don't have my calendar open here. Kelly usually tells me what that date is. So the next meeting will be January the 13th, Wednesday, January 13th. Again, if the COVID situation remains the same, which I suspect it might, we can either Zoom or attend in person, and we can make that determination as we approach that date. So again, thanks for everyone's help. Appreciate all the effort put forth by all, and stay safe and happy holidays. Meeting adjourned.